Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the Identity Project. This time, I have a very special guest, a new friend, if you will, somebody that I just met virtually through Instagram a few minutes ago. But Mr. Dr. Adrian Chavez, how are you, my man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did. Perfect.
Yes. Awesome. That's always a worry, right? You're like, you never want to butcher a name.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, dude, so what I want to dive into today, first off, is really just like your story. I want to learn, a little bit more about you and kind of how you've got to where you are today.
You want me to start with where I am today, or just start at the
Let's
beginning?
let's let's take it way back, and we'll take it back. Like, let's take it. How old are you now?
I am 31.
There. Oh, you're young. 31. Okay. Yeah. So let's take it back to like literally like elementary school.
Elementary school. So, in the context of nutrition, growing up, I pretty much ate a 100% junk food diet for the most part. Like my mom would come home and cook every night, but she was gone 95% of the time working, just lots of responsibilities. I had four brothers growing up. Stepdad was always gone. So we didn't have anyone in the house to prepare us food. We didn't have anyone to guide our nutritional choices. My mom made decisions 100% based on finances because that was the situation that we were in. Food was anything that we could eat is, that's good. That's anything that we would eat is a good thing. So I grew up eating a really poor diet. When I was, I'd say between about 5 and 11, I was chronically sick. Like I was sick all the time. I was on allergy shots. I was on just all sorts of medications, breathing treatments. I had asthma, bad allergies. I got hepatitis. I got the flu like every year. I missed so much school during that time period.
Wow.
And I was sick all the time. And, some people who are listening, just kind of knowing that I have a background in nutrition, are going to think, oh, it's a nutrition. It actually wasn't. I realized what was going on when I was 20 years old. So we moved when I was 11. We lived in government subsidized housing. So like some people know Section 8 or HUD, so there's different names for it. But basically the government pays your rent based on your income, which was really low. So they paid our rent. But the state of the apartments and the homes that people tend to live in they're not great. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in government subsidized housing, but in our case, we were exposed to mold. We had our apartment flood like 4 or 5 times while we lived there. And, looking back at it, I started doing some research when I was a master's student, about 21 years old. And I read all these papers about water damaged buildings and what happens when you live in a water damaged building. And that was it. Like I started to get better after 11 years old. When we moved, the allergies just slowly went away. And I have had four brothers. We were all on allergy shots. We were all going to the doctor all the time. We all had, sinuses congested all the time. Not one doctor, and we went to many, all of us did, different specialists. Not one doctor ever said, what are your kids breathing in? They all have respiratory issues. What are they breathing in? Like, that's the most simple question that should have been asked, number one. And I have directed a lot of my friends and clients to that direction as well, especially with kids, because, if the adults are not experiencing anything and the kids are, there's probably some particulate in the air. That's some type of issue in the air. Kids' respiratory systems are smaller and they have lower capacity to deal with it. Your ability to process mold and mycotoxins depends on genetics largely as well. But that's how I grew up. I was sick all the time. So after that, 11, 12, moved, started to get a little bit better. Wasn't sick all the time anymore. Got really into basketball at that time. Basically, in my mind, basketball was my only way to get to college. So I got obsessed with it. I would play all the time, all by myself. Like I would just go to the gym by myself for hours a day. because I knew that was probably or in my thought process at that point, like that was the only way I was going to get to college. Like parents ain't paying for it. So I need to figure out how to get there on my own, and basketball became my outlet. So I started playing, got pretty good, was all district, couple of years in a row, was one of the top, points and rebounds, and I put up pretty good stats in the Houston area, which is a pretty good basketball area, and started getting offers and that type of thing. But I decided at that point I had academic offers for scholarships as well, and I just didn't like it anymore. I had a terrible coach. I had one of the worst coaches you could possibly imagine. He just knew nothing about basketball. He had been coaching for like 40 years. I was 6'1", so he put me in the post, and I did not play that way at all. But I just made it work because I just played a lot. I would figure out how to make it work. But that's kind of my story leading up to college, and kind of what got me interested in nutrition was all these little kind of events. Me being interested in performance and getting really obsessed with basketball, and seeing how much better I could have been if I would have eaten differently. As soon as I moved out of the house at 18, I changed my diet pretty dramatically. And that was just intuition. I was like, you know what? This stuff doesn't make me feel good. I'm not going to go to the store and buy this stuff. Like, I just couldn't buy it. First time I went to the grocery store, it was just like, I'm not going to buy cookies and chips and stuff. Like, I don't feel good when I eat that. So I just naturally started eating differently and got really obsessed with this idea of nutrition and performance and how it impacts the way we feel and the way that we perform.
Wow. That's quite the story, man. I never would have expected to hear that. That's crazy. So, wow. I mean, going back to the mold, I guess we'll start there. Like, what happened with the government housing? I mean, like, was there any type of discussion as to like, hey, like, you made our kids sick or anything like that?
No, so the truth is we don't really know the numbers because there's no high quality testing. Like, no one's ever gone into your home and actually looked for mold. But it's probably in government subsidized housing over 50% or around 50% or over 50%, depending on where you live. In Houston, it floods a lot. It rains a lot. I bet it's like 70% there. And it's probably about 40 to 50% among normal housing, especially now because there was a hurricane that went through there and flooded the whole city. Like, I'm sure that I'd say over 50% of people that live in that city right now are probably being exposed to mold to some degree. Now, the degree to which it affects you is going to be largely dependent on genetics and what else is going on in your body. So I have a client who she has a couple of autoimmune diseases. We worked on those. She improved her symptoms dramatically. She was feeling great. And then she moved back into her home that she had to leave because it flooded. And she was staying with family for a year and a half as her home was getting completely redone. Her home flooded, feet of water. And I talked to her this weekend. So I worked with her a long time ago. She lost 50 pounds, just got in much better shape from a health perspective. She was feeling great. She was on the right trajectory. Hadn't talked to her in a while. She told me that her symptoms came back, and I said, "Are you still out of your home?" And she was like, "No, actually, now that you mention it, like, they started to come back as soon as I moved back." And I was like, "You have to get out of there. Like, you have to get out of that home." And that's the case for a lot of people. There's a lot of people dealing with autoimmune diseases and just non-specific symptoms. It's like, I have brain fog. I'm tired all the time. I'm getting sick often. And they have no idea that they're just being exposed to mold. Another story, one of my best friends, so he moved into his new house. He had moved into a brand new house. So there's no mold there. But during the transitional period, he put his furniture into storage. And he tells me that his child started getting all these respiratory issues, like his two younger children. And they went from doctor to doctor. Literally, they saw at least 8 to 10 different doctors over the course of like 6 weeks. And I asked him, like, what happened? What happened 6 weeks ago when these symptoms came on? And he was like, well, that's right when we moved. And I was like, okay, well, either there's something with your furniture, or he's just really sensitive to the paint and the flooring and all these other chemical based, particles that'll just stay around. They'll off gas a lot of different, formaldehyde and other harmful compounds. So I told him, open all the windows, open all the doors, keep your house as ventilated as possible, and put I gave him my air purifier, and I said, put this next to his crib, and if he sleeps better tonight, it's in the air. And I knew it was in the air anyway. He hadn't slept in weeks. He said that was the first time he actually got halfway decent night of sleep. And I was like, you have to get it tested. You have to get the house tested. So he got it tested for mold. There was mold on all of his furniture. Ended up costing him like $3,000 to get it all. He got rid of some of it, and then the rest, like clothes and stuff, they had to do some intense washing and all this anti-mold treatment. But this was another case that not one medical professional even mentioned, even asked them, what is your child breathing in? What changed? Not the most simple questions, because that's just not how they operate, which kind of opened my eyes. Learning that is what opened my eyes and caused me to choose the direction or the path that I have taken. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Wow, man, that is mind blowing. I mean, this is coming from somebody that's been in the nutrition fitness space, mainly nutrition, for the last 5 years. I have a nutrition degree. I study nutrition all the time. And I've started diving more into environmental toxins and things like that. But man, that is mind blowing. That's crazy.
Yeah. The water damage stuff is probably one of the most common things that people are exposed to that they're not recognizing. People are sometimes worried about the little things and not really recognizing these large things that are just obvious. There's some clients that come to me that they have health issues, and I'm like, they feel better when they leave their house. And it's like, well, you got to move. You just have to move. In some cases, there's no way around it. You have to get out of that environment.
Wow, that is crazy. And it makes me think, actually. So I have a client that I worked with who has Crohn's, but what he does for his career is he remodels bathrooms, and there's paint and all of that. It's sparking something to me now. I mean, that's got to be a huge contributor.
100%. I bet he would get better if he not better, of course. Crohn's is complex. I have a couple of clients with Crohn's as well. I bet he would improve though if he got himself out of all of that. I mean, wow. It's stimulating the immune system. The immune system is basically mounting an attack against everything that's being breathed in that's not recognized as self. It's not recognized as your own tissues, and that's going to cause an overreactive immune system if you're exposing yourself to that over and over again all day. And if you're remodeling, a lot of times you're working in really moldy environments too, and exposing yourself to those mycotoxins as well.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, because his body responded really, really well. I mean, he was the person that was just never just treating his body like garbage, right? And so obviously through a lot of the lifestyle stuff that we changed, he saw a lot of improvements. But I mean, obviously he has Crohn's, but I mean, this is his working environment on the daily. So that's crazy. That really kind of sparks a thought process through my head. That's for sure.
There's so many things that you have to think about and consider when it comes to someone's overall health. And, I specialize in nutrition, but I do my best to be aware of all of these other factors that could be making my nutritional protocols not work the way that we would expect.
Yeah, absolutely. So you decided to go the nutrition route. What led you to go and get your master's and then your PhD? Because I know for me, it was a struggle for me to finish even my bachelor's. I just never, I have dyslexia, ADD. I mean, I got this will blow your mind. I got prescribed 60 milligram Vyvanse the very first time that I ever went to the doctor about like ADD, ADHD, whatever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just hand that stuff out like candy, which is, in short term it works, but long term there can be some problems. But as far as my own story, my initial interest was in exercise science. So I have my bachelor's and master's in exercise science.
Got it.
I
Okay.
I read nutrition just as much. Like the first 2 years, I was an engineering major. I knew that I was going to get my PhD or MD or whatever the terminal degree was in the field that I chose early on. I going into college, I have a pretty good ability to learn, and I knew that. And going in freshman year, I thought it was going to be much harder than it was, and it was like I can pick this up pretty easily. So I made a decision at that point, like, okay, if I go in the healthcare field, I'm going medical doctor. If I go, law or anything like that, I'm going, and getting my JD. And then if I do anything else, engineering or um, I was also looking at just general mathematics because I've always been good at math. And I was planning on getting a PhD. I had no interest in exercise science as a degree because I thought I couldn't make money doing it. So I started training, and I started reading like crazy about the human body and exercise science and physiology and nutrition. And then I would go to class and I would just like do the bare minimum to keep up my just wanted at least 3.5 great GPA. I would literally do the bare minimum to keep up my 3.5 GPA because I was like, that's what I need to go to grad school. I'll do well on the standardized test. And I realized a couple years in, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm spending so much time on learning about the human body and performance and nutrition. Like I need to switch up my major. So a couple years in, I decided that I was going to change it up to exercise science. And I wanted to train athletes. That was my interest. I wanted to basically work with high-level basketball players. And so that was my interest all the way up until my first semester of my master's degree. And that's when a couple of things happened. That's when I started reading research. So I got into a class that was like population health. And I started reading a lot of research on health, the health application of exercise and nutrition. And I realized that this is basically one of the most potent forms of medicine that you can possibly apply, especially preventative. And so that got me thinking more about like, okay, if I'm really going to get, take this to the level that I want to take it, learn it to the degree that I want to learn it, I feel like the application towards health is a much more worthwhile pursuit than the application towards performance. So although I still like, and I don't practice this, and I want to eventually, like I want to train athletes one day, I still have like a burning desire to do so. Like I want to take high school kids and get them college scholarships or help them get college scholarships by training them and applying the nutrition. It's not, I saw an opportunity to go in a direction where I felt like the impact was greater. So I just changed up I was already like applying for PhD programs in exercise physiology. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I need to get into a nutrition program. And I didn't have any nutrition background. Like I had no formal background in nutrition. So I took a couple of graduate classes and started reading textbooks, like basically took a nutrition curriculum undergrad and took all the textbooks and started reading them just so I felt like I could be prepared to go into a PhD program that was centered around nutrition. At that point, another thing happened as well. I developed a stomach ulcer, and I was I went to a couple of I went to my general practitioner. He put me on what's called triple therapy, which is 2 antibiotics and a proton pump inhibitor, an antacid. And that didn't help at all. It made it worse. So I went back to him. I was like, look, this didn't work. He was like, okay, let me refer you to a GI specialist. Went to a GI specialist. They were like, sounds like you have a stomach ulcer. We can do a scope and go in there and check it out and confirm. And then if you do, we can cut it out. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like that sounds pretty intense. I have symptoms. It was a sharp burning pain every day pretty much, but that sounded like an intense thing to do. And I'm like, if I get the scope, you know, the only step is if it's there, we cut it out. If it's not, we don't know what to tell you. And that was kind of what the specialist told me. And I was like, that's not a sufficient answer for me. That's not okay. So I went home and did a bunch of reading, basically consumed everything I could about stomach ulcers and how to heal them naturally. And within about 4 weeks, I didn't have a symptom again. And it went away. I just got rid of it. I changed my diet dramatically. And at that point, that's when I really got obsessed with nutrition, because I realized that exercise was great for upgrading your body and making yourself, perform better and longevity wise, really increasing that. But I saw nutrition as a really potent medicine, because I was able to get a result that no doctors could get for me very quickly just with nutrition. And that really opened my eyes to the value of nutrition as a medicinal tool. And that's when, so that was I was taking the class and dealing with that at the same time. And that was when I was just okay, I have to dive into this nutrition space and really specialize in that. And I did not know how I would do it, but in my head, I had this idea that I would be helping people with chronic disease as their doctor with primarily using nutrition. So I was like, I'll just get a PhD in nutrition, learn as much as I can, and then I'll figure it out from there.
Wow, dude, that's awesome, man. I mean, you hear and you talk to so many different people, and obviously everybody's opinions are, they're all over the place. But I just think hearing you say that, I mean, it just kind of reinsures that the mission of using nutrition first as a preventative measure, nutrition can literally change your life. And I mean, for you, talk about a calling. I mean, you've just had multiple things that have led, throughout your life that have impacted you and made you want to pay it forward by, becoming an expert and being able to help people that are coming to you with more complex issues than maybe your, traditional lack of compliance like we see a lot of the time. But man, that's super powerful. So did you as you're going through your degree process, cause I know for me, I mean, I started off as a personal trainer, and I felt all the personal trainers did kinesiology or exercise science. And so for me, I was all right, well, I'm going to do nutrition. And at that time I was kind of looking at nutrition. I was looking at strength conditioning, wanting to be a college strength conditioning coach. And then also I was looking at physical therapy. But out of all of those, to me, it was just man, nutrition is the missing link. It's the missing link in all of these things. And so that's what made me go all in. So that's awesome, man. So that then led you in, so today, do you do all your consulting online, or how does your practice work now today?
I do it all virtually. I do that because I'm a single dad and I want to have control over my time completely. So eventually I will probably open up an in-person facility and hire coaches and actually offer an in-person service where I have a small gym, office, teaching, cooking area where we're teaching people how to make healthy foods, and maybe a little cafe. That is something that I wanted to do earlier, but now, having my son and for example, today, earlier today, he had a parade at school. I'm not going to not show up for this stuff. He doesn't have anyone else but me. So, in that regard, that's why I've chosen to do everything completely online. I work with clients. I do some consulting as well for companies, research wise. So I love reading research papers. So I do that as a a way to augment my income with you know more consistent income, where it's not necessarily relying 100% on working with clients in the business. So I do that, do some research consulting, and then I like to take on complex cases. As you mentioned, I most of my cases, which is kind of draining. I can only take so many because most of my cases are Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. It's pretty much all autoimmune and gut issues. Sometimes I will take on people who either want to lose a lot of weight, or they're just really motivated and they want to just have a pretty solid transformation in like a 12-week period or something. I will do that occasionally. And those are just people that know me, that come to me and they're like, hey, I won't go to anyone else. So, let's work together. And they know that I mostly work with the complex cases, but I'll do that occasionally. The way that so I still, like, I enjoy helping people, like, transform their body and get fit and all of that. It's just, it doesn't give me the intellectual stimulation that the really difficult cases do. So I run group programs and kind of get my fix through that. Like, I run a dad's based fitness program where I don't do any of the fitness programming. I just I guide them on nutrition, and that helps me to like impact more people. And really, I think last year we had over 100 guys who participated in the program. We have all these. I love it. Just all these guys that come back to me and they're like, man, you taught me what I needed to know, and you showed me how to do it, and I'm still doing it, and my life is completely changed forever. That I love too. It's just my bandwidth is limited with working with these complex cases, because I try to focus on those because I know that I'm just more equipped to be able to help some of these people than, just if they just go to kind of a regular, nutritionist most of the time. I mean, most of my clients have gone to naturopaths, have gone to functional medicine doctors, have gone to nutritionists, and they just didn't get the results that they were looking for. So they're desperate, and sometimes they expect me to work wonders. So I do my best, and like I said, though, it's for me, it's just stimulating. It's like a puzzle that needs to be solved. Like, what could possibly be going on? So that's what's caused me to, like, the mold stuff and every aspect of a lifestyle that could be contributing to these complex conditions are what I have now focused on. And I didn't do that until the last 3 years, because I graduated with my PhD 3 years ago. And prior to that, it was all nutrition all the time. I didn't know anything about these other lifestyle things and exposure, environmental toxins, but in mold and yeast and all that. But I've had to learn, because I do enjoy these more difficult cases.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think, I mean, it's so funny. Like, I mean, over the last 8, 9, 10 years, like, I've learned from working with people that it's just so much more than just nutrition, whether we're diving in like to molds and things like that, environmental toxins, or if we're diving into like the psychological point of it. Like, it's so fascinating to me. I mean, human change, like transforming somebody's life, there's so many components that go into that. So one thing I really want to dive into with you is, the sexy topic these days of gut health. A lot of people are talking about it, but let's start it off with, like, with your diet. You said you made changes when you had the stomach ulcer and you kind of, remedied that yourself. What was the biggest issue with your diet before and after that?
So I was eating like a bodybuilder type diet. I was eating like 250 grams or more protein every day.
Damn, and
Wasn't
how much did you weigh?
I weighed like 210, 215 at that point.
Oh, okay, okay.
Um, yeah, so I'm 6'1". I was about 215. Like, um, I wasn't like ripped or anything like that, but I just kind of, I read a lot of bodybuilding.com. Learned my first bit of learning was all on bodybuilding.com. And, uh, I kind of followed that nutritional strategy of like, okay, I'm gonna add in some vegetables. I'm gonna eat decently healthy, but for the most part, it was really high protein. Um, Probably didn't eat enough produce. In That was one of the main changes. I basically went nearly vegetarian, and that was from someone who ate large portions of meat 3 or 4 times per day. But I read that the protein was causing increased stomach acid production because protein is difficult to digest, and it causes the stomach to empty out more slowly, which can be a good thing for a lot of people. But in my case, with the stomach ulcer, uh, I didn't want more hydrochloric acid, and I didn't want my stomach to empty slowly because in that case, it was aggravating that ulcer. So that was one of the main things that I did. I started eating a lot of sauerkraut and cabbage and salads. Like I never ate a salad before that. I would have like salads with beans and all sorts of vegetables for like my meals, and that's what did it.
Would
That
you
I mean,
would you say like was your diet a lot more rich in vegetables after versus before? Like how many cups or like how many grams of vegetables do you think you were averaging per day before?
100%. So I was probably eating like maybe 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per day before. Afterward, I was probably 8 to 10, and
Wow.
I got really obsessed with like micronutrient uh, quality or micronutrient like sufficiency, like getting just tons of different colors of vegetables, and every meal I would make would be like my salads would have peppers and onions and sauerkraut and tomatoes, and I would just add in as many vegetables as I could, all
Chase
different
the rainbow, right?
types. Yeah, yeah, and it worked. I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with. So there was a couple other things that happened during that time. So I took ibuprofen. I took 800 milligrams of ibuprofen for say about 4 years leading up to that, and that destroys your stomach lining and causes stomach ulcers. The doctor didn't even ask me about it. Like, didn't even ask me about it. I wasn't taking it every day at that point, but when I was younger, I took it every day because I had knee pain and I was playing basketball and I wasn't gonna not play a game. So I would just take ibuprofen every single day, and I got prescribed it, and it worked every time I took it. When I didn't take it, I could feel it. In college, I tried to rely on it less, but I would still use it probably every other day or so. And I drank a lot in college too, so that probably contributed. But I would say, I think the ibuprofen had a lot to do with it, the long-term use of ibuprofen. I had a couple of years where I drank a lot, but this ulcer came on a little bit later. And I mean, I think it was just a combination of factors. I was doing my master's degree. Maybe I was a little bit stressed because stress can contribute to the breakdown of the stomach lining and also contribute to stomach ulcers. Maybe it was an exposure because H. pylori. There's a bacteria called H. pylori that can cause it. But I can't tell exactly what caused it, but going onto a more plant-based diet and kind of getting away from the very high protein diet that I was doing before was a game changer. And I think also I was eating a lot of sauerkraut at every meal. And cabbage has been shown. I found a study that showed that cabbage, it was a study published a long time ago, but drinking lots of cabbage juice actually healed stomach ulcers in almost every case. So at that point, I was like, sauerkraut has the probiotics. It's fermented. I'm just going to eat tons of that. So I would put it in every salad a couple times. I was eating like 2 salads per day. And that I think helped as well.
Got it. Wow, man, that's interesting. And I think like, I mean, a lot of people listening to this right now, like, it just kind of reinstates the point that we made earlier, which was like the power of nutrition and being able to like change something. I mean, they were going to go in and, do like surgery, and here you are in 4 months, you fixed it on your own. Like that's mind blowing,
Yeah.
because they
And
don't give you like, they didn't present that option to you, you know?
they told me it had nothing to do with my diet. They were like, the doctor was like, you eat a great diet. And I'm like, yeah, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's great for the condition that I'm dealing with. Because, I mean, they just looked at me, fit young guy. I told them what I ate. It was like, chicken and rice every meal kind of thing, eggs and eggs for breakfast, chicken for every other meal, and lots of it. And that's kind of, I mean, they looked at that and they're like, oh, that's a great diet. But yeah, I've worked with multiple people. I know what to do now with the stomach ulcer. I would have got rid of it even quicker back then. But it's crazy. I've worked with 3 to 4 different people, and they've been through multiple rounds of GI specialists. Pretty much all my GI clients, so they have been through the ringer with their GI doctors, and that might be one of the worst specialists that you can possibly see is a GI specialist, because in almost every case, number one, they're not going to assess your microbiome, which is ridiculous because that's what's driving GI issues is the bacteria in your intestines, like in almost every case. And I've never seen someone who saw the GI specialist who did a stool test right off the bat. They're scoping, and they're basically putting a camera in there. And putting a camera into your GI tract is going to tell you absolutely nothing about what's causing your gastrointestinal issues. Nothing. But the margins are amazing for a GI specialist. They make huge margins. It was like, I think that it was an endoscopy. They told me that it was going to be $4,000, and I had to pay like $2,000 out of pocket. And that was when I was like, this is ridiculous. Like just to look at what's going on. But that's what GI specialists do. They just do endoscopies and colonoscopies all day. And I get these clients that come to me and they're like, hey, this is what my GI specialist told me. Look at the images they gave me and stuff. And I'm like, I can't do anything with that. You got diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome because your GI doctor did an endoscopy. And it's like, your bowels were irritable when you came in. Like that tells me absolutely nothing about what's really going on. You need to look at your stool. And that's going to be the most important thing you can possibly do if you have a GI condition. You absolutely need to look at your microbiome. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we know a lot about the microbiome. I'd say right now, I've read as many papers as I can get my hands on, and I would say that I know pretty much nothing about it. But that's typically going to be where the problems come from. If you have lots of bloating and every time you eat, you probably have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. If anytime you eat sugar, you get extreme cravings and you can't go without sugar and you get constant yeast infections, you probably have candida overgrowth. And we can measure those things if we look at the stool. A good clinician, as you can probably kind of tell just by me talking about this, I've measured, dozens and dozens of people, have listened to their symptoms and the time course and, what's going on. And most of the time I can guess before we even get back to test results of what we're going to find. But you do need to look at your microbiome if you're dealing with these GI issues, and your GI specialist is not going to do it. It's absolutely, it's just appalling to me how many people I work with serious GI issues. I just sent one of my clients with Crohn's disease. I just sent her a letter that she's going to give to her doctor to see if he will recommend the tests that I'm asking for to measure her stool and to assess her stool, so that her HSA, her health savings account, will pay for it. Her doctor, who she's been working with for years, and she has Crohn's disease, has never assessed her microbiome. That blows my mind. Like, that just blows my mind. Now, I get it. We didn't know anything about these bugs. We couldn't even measure them well until the last 10 years. So if you got a specialty if you did a GI specialty in a residency and you did that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you don't know anything about it. You didn't learn anything about it. So unless you pull yourself out of your practice for a period of time, or, have a good balance where you're learning on the side, most of those specialists are going to be pretty useless.
Wow. That's crazy, man. I mean, I just want to commend you, like, because what percentage would you say of doctors, because we run into this all the time, what percentage of doctors do you feel that actually continue on with like further education after they finish school?
I'd say it's less than 10%. Now they have to get their further education. They have to get their, I forget exactly what it's called. They have to get continuing education credits, I believe is what they call it. Yeah, so they have to get those, but they're getting those by going to conferences that are sponsored by drug companies. Like, that's how they get their CEUs, is like, and I've been to them, and it's like, because I've gone to conferences that I'm interested in. Like, there was one that I went to every year called Metabolism, Insulin Resistance, and Type 2 or World Congress on Metabolism, Insulin Resistance, and Type 2 Diabetes. It was an amazing conference. And it was one of the few that I went to. There was like almost all doctors. There was only like a few non-doctors there. And pretty much nobody showed up. Like, it was like half the room was empty. As soon as the talks are over, they wheel in the drinks and appetizers, and the drug reps are walking around, snoozing everybody. And it's like, this is way different than the conferences that I'm used to going to that aren't, that are mostly nutrition and exercise science professionals and scientists, not practitioners. And that's what they're doing. And I mean, at that conference, that was great because doctors actually learned a lot if they went there. We talked a lot about lipoproteins and stuff that most doctors don't even know. It blows my mind. Like, the most important marker for heart disease that we can easily test in the blood is apolipoprotein B. It tells us how many, there's other ways to test it. It tells us how many particles of LDL are floating around in the bloodstream. It's really important to test. I have sent probably at least 25 people who came to me that had quote unquote high cholesterol. And I said, okay, let's go to your doctor. Let's request a cholesterol particle test so that we can determine whether or not your quote unquote high cholesterol is harmful. I haven't one time had them say that their doctor knew what that was and they were cool with it. Like, and this is probably 25 to 30 occasions. 0% of doctors even knew what it was. And it's the most important marker of heart disease. You shouldn't put someone on a lipid, on a statin, if you don't know if they have high particle number. Because studies are showing that you can have a high LDL cholesterol, but if there's only a couple of really large particles, then it's not increasing your risk for heart disease. It's only increasing your risk for heart disease when there's a whole bunch of tiny particles floating around, and that's what is a problem. And that can easily be measured for less. I have to get my clients to buy the test online for like $50, and it's just, I want to know. I don't want to tell you to go on a diet that's going to reduce cholesterol if your 120 LDL is not a problem, because you already have, a small amount of particles. So, that one is probably the one that blows my mind the most, because the first papers that were published on that were in the 90s, and it was about 2004 where a review paper was written that was pretty, it just was really clear. It was like, LDL cholesterol does not matter if we can measure LDL particle number. And that's almost 15 years ago, or right about 15 years ago, when those papers were published. And most cardiologists don't even measure it. Like they're just, I mean, goes back to your point. They're not doing the continuing education. If you have an old doctor, if your doctor's 60, 70, I mean, we knew 1% of what we know about the human body, 40 years ago when your doctor got training. And I mean, it'd be hard to trust that person unless you knew that they were, really doing their research on the side.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's mind blowing, man. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like I've had a client tell me that they wanted to get, a certain test done and their doctor would like literally like say no or like just completely dismiss it. And like it just blew my mind because, you and I, like when we have clients work with us, like, I mean, I want to go above and beyond and do anything in my power to help them. But unfortunately, like it's just not the case with that. And I understand, I mean, they don't have, they have like 5 minutes with the client versus us that has more time. And there's different scenarios, but at the end of the day, ultimately, like if you're truly here to like help people, then like help people.
Yeah. There's another one that I just want your listeners to be aware of. If you're on thyroid medication, this one just blows my mind. People are on thyroid medication, thyroid replacement medication. So they're on levothyroxine, which is T4, which is not the active form of thyroid hormone. They are on the medication and they've never gotten their thyroid hormone measured. They've only looked at TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That is not a thyroid hormone. It's a pituitary gland hormone that is signaling the thyroid to produce T3 and T4. And we have no idea what's happening after the TSH acts on the thyroid and whether or not the thyroid is actually producing what it's supposed to produce. And I don't think I've had 5 or 6 clients with who have been on thyroid replacement, and they've never had any of their thyroid hormones measured. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like that one blows my mind almost more than any of them, because it's like you're giving them T4. You have to measure it. Like you cannot replace something without measuring it. But it's happening, and it's clinical guidelines. Clinical guidelines say if TSH is over 5, then thyroid replacement medication is indicated. So that is a lazy physician, though, if they're still just going by clinical guidelines and not reading further into it and understanding, especially if they're an endocrinologist and they don't understand all this, and they don't understand how iron and magnesium and selenium and iodine and deficiencies in those nutrients could be affecting your thyroid hormone production. Like, that's just lazy. And just like you said, if you care as a physician, you're going to read up on it, especially if you're dealing with a lot of clients or a lot of patients who have that. And unfortunately, a lot of them don't.
Yeah, man. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And honestly, it's just such like, again, it's such a breath of like fresh air hearing you say this. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, like what you just said about thyroid, that's the commonality. It's always TSH, and they never test T3 or T4, reverse T3 or, antibodies or any of that. So yeah, it's just a breath of fresh air, honestly, on my end, hearing you say that. So you've shared a few things now that have been really eye-opening, not only to me, but obviously to the audience listening. Do you have any, maybe, 2 or 3 more things? Like, is there anything else, like whether it's gut health related or not, that like the audience needs to make sure that we bring awareness to them?
One of the things that, I'm really big on is, because people ask me like, hey, I have gut issues. What do I do? The gut is the most complicated thing I've ever dived into. And I've tried to understand a lot of different things about the human body. But it's really interesting to me how some people need to eat fiber to feed their microbiome, and that helps them. And then other people, when they eat fiber, it feeds their microbiome, and it's feeding the wrong stuff, and it's causing complete chaos. So I think when it comes to gut health, really one of the most important things you need to do is just develop a very high level of awareness of what your body is responding to, what you feel good after. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be GI symptoms. If you feel like when you eat something, you get a little bit of a headache, if you get a little bit of joint pain, if you get a little bit of what's called brain fog, when you just don't feel like you're thinking as sharp. Be aware of that stuff. Because when people come to me and I try to ask them, like, what foods cause problems? What about this food? What about this food? Many people are not aware of it at all. And I think that lack of awareness is what gets people in trouble. If you start to become aware of it, you can really make most of the changes that you need to make on your own. And you can improve your symptomology very effectively on your own without even having to work with anyone. Now, if you're in a situation where, I think this is what a lot of people are doing right now who are self-selecting on low-carb diets, is if you're in a situation where you can't handle something that is what's considered a healthy food and it really just causes major problems, then there's probably an underlying issue. Like, for example, I know a lot of people who have gone keto and they're like, every time I eat a carb, it just makes my gut go crazy. And I'm like, you have a digestive issue. It's not that carbs are bad. Carbs are completely good. And I mean, most of the literature that we have that, is showing the diets that lead to the longest lives and the lowest rates of cancer and heart disease, they're high carb diets. People eating a whole bunch of rice. They're just not eating too much of it. They're high carb diets, but these people are not overeating. And that's the distinction. I think too many people who are eating high carb diets are just overeating, because it's easy to do that. But, if you're experiencing that, if you just can't tolerate carbs, you have a gut issue. Like, that's almost 100% of the time. I speak to a lot of people who are like, I'm on this low carb diet. I feel great off it. I was, I had all this inflammation and joint pain before and it's all gone. And I'm like, what happens when you eat carbs again? And it's like, oh, it all comes back. And I'm like, you didn't fix the problem. So I think that's a very important one. If you feel really good on a low carb diet and feel really bad anytime you eat any carbs, fruit, oatmeal, whatever, you need to get your gut looked at, and you need to really focus on that, because staying on the low carb diet or the keto diet is like being in a relationship and not breaking it off or not fixing it. But just kind of like, oh, well, if we meet each other, we're going to fight. So I'm just going to move into the other room and avoid my spouse. You can fix a relationship. You can fix your relationship with carbs. You can tolerate them again, because low carb dieting is going to lead to a negative impact on your microbiome, which is not a big deal. We don't know how big of a deal it is, honestly, but it's not a big deal. It's not as big of a deal as the symptoms if you're constantly inflamed. But if you're constantly inflamed anytime you eat carbs, there's a problem, and it's a gut problem almost every time.
Wow, that's interesting. So, like, you mentioned getting all this testing done, right? So, like, let's say, for instance, you're mentioning a lot of these symptoms and whatnot. Like, are there resources that you can direct people to self-educate themselves, as well as in terms of getting testing done, like, and they go to their doctor and he says no, or she says no, what do they do then?
Okay. Resources, I would recommend my podcast. I have probably 30 different episodes on gut health. So the podcast is called Your Nutrition Prescription. If you go to, oh man, I'm going to have to send you this link because it's kind of difficult.
We'll post it in the show notes.
Yeah. So there's a database where you can actually search the podcast, and if you just type in gut or digestion or anything along those lines, you'll find the episodes I've done on it. And I've done at least 30 on gut health, on specific conditions, SIBO, Candida, other types of conditions that you might be experiencing, how gut health impacts autoimmune disease and all of that. The test that I like the most is called a GI map. And that test, I don't sell it. I usually refer my clients to buy it off of someone else's website. But if you just type in GI map, you'll be able to find the information on that test and be able to purchase it. That's my favorite because it does a DNA analysis of your stool. So it will catch more than other stool tests will. There's also a 2-day test where you collect 2 days of samples, and it's not genetic, but it's almost double the price. So typically, I lean towards the GI map because we can get most of what we need on the GI map. And then if anything else, if there's just continued issues, then maybe I would go to, doing a test that might catch a little bit more. But the GI map is pretty good. It gives markers of immune function, inflammation. It gives parasites, yeast, bacteria, and it's really, it's probably for like $400, probably one of the best things you can do for if you have a digestive issue.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Well, dude, I honestly could probably continue to ask you questions till 10 p.m. tonight, but I want to respect your time. I know you're a busy man. I'd love to probably bring you back on at some point and really, really dive deep into this stuff. But guys, check out his podcast. I think that's going to be a phenomenal resource. 30 episodes on gut health, like that's amazing. I need to go check that out. But where can everybody find you? Social media, website? Where can they reach out to connect with you?
So, my favorite is Instagram. So we were talking about this before the show. I try to post like, sometimes I'll take breaks because it gets a little bit much, but I usually post like 1 to 2 times, try to give some education on there, give a little bit of insight into my life and lifestyle through the stories. But yeah, Instagram is my favorite place. And my handle is Your Nutrition Prescription. No spaces, no underscores, anything like that. You can also find me on Facebook at Dr. Adrian Chavez. And if you type that in, you'll find my business page. And that's just linked to my Instagram. It's mostly Instagram posts just being doubled over on Facebook. But if you prefer Facebook, that's another place. And if you're at this point, if you're commenting or you reach out to me, I can reach out back to you. I will typically get back to you within 24, 48 hours. So if you had any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them. You could just reach out to me there. But yeah, I prefer that over any other medium.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, I got so much value from this. All the listeners here, y'all need to go back and re-listen to this episode and actually take notes this time because I know y'all didn't. But dude, this was so valuable. Like I have so many takeaways from it. So I really appreciate it. And we'll have to get you back on at some point.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me.